brakes, heavy bullets, neck turning, iPad data books, and more this week on Mail Call Mondays. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Well, if you look at the bench in front of me and our table behind me, you'll notice that it's kind of a wreck here. What we're doing right now is we've taken our Remington 700 AAC-SD that was in a Cadex Strike 30 dual chassis. We have ripped everything apart and we have removed the barrel from the action. What we're doing is we're pulling the 308 barrel off of it, and we're going to replace it with a Remington AAC 260 drop-in barrel. This is a 24-inch barrel chambered in 260 Remington, and it's designed to be able to install without any chambering, without any lathe work on the barrel itself. Basically what you do is you use the recoil lug to set the headspace on the barrel. We've got everything tore down. We took some measurements on it, and we're having a lug ground to the correct dimensions to put it all back together with that barrel. And this is basically an experiment just to see what kind of accuracy we can get from a drop-in barrel without doing anything to the action at all. We're not truing the action, we're not blueprinting it, we're not changing any dimensions on the action. We're just going to drop that barrel in. I'm going to put a different factory Remington trigger on it to get rid of the old X-Mark trigger, and we'll be good to go from there. It's a really interesting process, and I'm going to be very interested to see what the end result is, if we can get a match quality rifle out of a drop-in barrel. If this thing shoots under 3/4 minute, I'll be somewhat satisfied for the money spent. If it shoots under a half minute, I will be extremely satisfied with the combination. So we're going to see how that goes, and we'll bring you guys along for it. Taking the factory Remington barrel off was not exactly an easy task. It took quite a bit of work on our part to do it and not damage anything on the actual rifle or the barrel, because we want to be able to keep that 308 barrel in good condition. That way we can swap barrels whenever we want to swap barrels back and forth between the 260 or the 308. So that's what we've got going on here, and that is why the shop is destroyed the way it is. Hopefully we'll be able to get a good piece going for you and let you know. I feel kind of bad because we picked up the 260 barrel on a closeout. I don't know that AAC is going to be producing these barrels anymore, but there are some other drop-in and short chamber barrels out there. So this may give you an idea of what you can do with some of those. I wish we could have gotten into this earlier when those barrels were readily available, but you know, it's just something that we didn't get to at that point. Now, our first question of the week is about brakes. Andrea asks, what kind of muzzle brake do you recommend for a 308 bolt action rifle, even though they may not strictly require one? Well, the 308 doesn't strictly require a brake. I've shot and unbraked 308s quite a bit, but a brake can help you remain on target and get that little faster follow-up shot when you're shooting from kinked up or non-standard positions. If you're shooting in a nice solid prone position, then you can really keep that rifle on target through recoil even without a brake. The brake just allows you a little bit more leeway in your position to not be totally perfect and keep the rifle on target. Now, as far as what kind of brake, there are so many brakes out there that are effective and work. It's really difficult to point to any one and say this is the best brake. What you first have to decide is you have to decide if you are going to mount a suppressor on this rifle. If you are, then it would be in your best interest to look at brakes that will mount that suppressor. If you're not trying to mount a suppressor, then there are a couple of good options out there. The JP Tactical Recoil Eliminator, I think it's called, is a very effective brake, and it comes in a couple of different sizes. You can get a smaller size that is legal in some of the different competitions out there. Then you have a larger size that adds just a little bit more recoil reduction, but is considerably larger on the rifle. We run the larger JP brake on Sarah's rifle because in the competitions that we shoot in, there is no requirement on brake size. And that brake is large. It adds a little bit of weight to the front of the muzzle because it is such a large brake, but it's very effective in reducing the recoil. It's a 2-chamber brake, and it does a good job. Now on the suppressor side of things, lately here I've been using a Surefire SOCOM brake, which allows you to mount a SOCOM suppressor on the end. And the SOCOM brake works very well at recoil reduction as well. It's not as large or cumbersome as the JP brake, and I don't have any way to shoot them side by side right now and tell you which one is the greater recoil reduction, but they both work very well. I would assume that the JP is going to be a little bit more recoil reduction because of the larger baffles that it runs in that brake, but the Surefire brakes allow me to really drive that rifle and keep it on target. We've shot them on the Ma-10, and even in a standing position with rapid follow-up shots, it does a really good job of keeping the muzzle down, driving the rifle straight back, and reducing some of that straight back recoil impulse. So take a look at those. For the current project that we're working on with the 260, I actually, and it should be arriving today, we picked up one of the AAC single chamber brakes. This is a non-mount brake. It's not designed to mount an AAC suppressor. It's just designed to reduce the recoil. We have been using the 223 version on one of the ARs that we just recently built up, and it's worked great on that rifle. So I went ahead and got the 30 caliber version, and we're going to see how well that works. The advantage of the AAC brakes is they're very short. They don't add a lot of overall length to your barrel. They just basically have one baffle in front to kick those gases out to the side. If the 30 caliber works as well as the 223 did, I think it's going to be a very, very nice option for guys that really don't want to add a lot to the rifle, but do want a little bit of recoil reduction. So stay tuned for our opinions on the 30 caliber AAC brake. TJ asks, what do you think of the Archangel stock for the Remington 700? Do you think it would make a decent long-range stock for the 308? Well, TJ, I've looked at the specs on the Archangel stock, and that's really about as far as we've gone. I really want to try to get one of those in just to throw it on 700 real quick and see how well it works. But the main thing you want to keep in mind when you're looking at these stocks is if it has the features that you think will work well. Is the configuration of the stock something that you would enjoy? These stocks, there are so many of them out there. Mainly what you're worried about is you're worried about that aluminum bedding block. If it has an aluminum bedding block that is cut true, that will accurately support the action, then there's not going to be a large accuracy difference from stock to stock. The big thing is how it helps you fit the rifle to your body. I believe the Archangel stock has adjustable length of pull, adjustable comb, and those are the two big things with getting you stuck behind that scope in the appropriate position. The Archangel stock appears to be a more solid, less expensive plastic version of the JAE stocks. So we'll have to see. I'll have to contact Archangel and see if we can get one of those in to play with. Tyler asks, what's the biggest bullet I can put through my 20-inch 1 in 10 308 barrel? I've heard of people going out to a mile with 208s. Well, Tyler, I've shot the 208s in a 1 in 12 twist 20-inch barrel on our Accuracy International AE Mark II. I got good accuracy out of them, but the problem that you run into is to get the velocity up there to where they can compete ballistically with 175s. You really have to seat those bullets out long. That way you get enough powder in the case. When you seat the bullets out long, you can no longer feed them from the magazine. If you can't feed them from the magazine, you've just turned your rifle into a single-shot rifle. So if you're really trying to throw bullets long range, then that may be fine if you're just in a situation where you can single load those bullets off of a ammunition carrier external to the rifle, then you're going to be okay. If it's something where you need quick follow-up shots, it's probably not going to be okay. Really, before you even think about what you can throw through your rifle, you want to grab a ballistic calculator and you want to start punching in the numbers and see what velocity you have to try to get those 208s to compete with a 175 at 2650, 2700. 2650 is a pretty standard velocity for a 175 grain Match King. So take those ballistics and then see, running a 208, how fast you have to push it to get there. If I remember right, because it's been a while since I've messed with them, 2400 to 2500 was about as fast as I could push those 208s, even single loading them, before I run into really some bad situations. The point that I was at when I was doing the load development with them was I was running such a compressed load that if I tried to go for any higher velocity, it would push the bullet back out of the case. So I could actually seat that bullet with the press, pull the cartridge out of the press, measure it, set it aside on the bench, measure it 10 minutes later, and it would have grown because the powder was pushing the bullet back out. And that, we didn't even run into a seating length issue anymore because I was just keeping enough of the bullet back into the case to retain the bullet. The rule of thumb you want to go by when you're loading is you want at least 1 caliber length of the bullet still in the neck. So if you're running a 30 caliber bullet, you at least want 3/10 of an inch of that bullet in the case. When you're talking about a bow tail bullet, you want 3/10 of a bearing surface, so you got to discount the length of the bow tail that isn't actually grabbing the case wall. So there's a lot of stuff to go through when you look at that. I put the 208s aside and really didn't go through much more workup with those because they just didn't work out for what I wanted to do. If I was really trying to extend those ranges, then 308 was not the cartridge to do it with. I needed to switch to a different cartridge. So keep those things in mind. Our next question is from Roe, and I butchered his name last time, so we're just going to stick with Roe this time. Trigger groups for Remington 700. Why the large price difference from brand to brand, and thoughts on Remington 700 Mark X versus name brand adjustables? Well, the price difference basically comes down to features and quality. The higher tolerances needed in triggers that are adjusting down to lower weight ranges and remaining reliable require higher tolerances. Higher tolerances require better machining, better quality control checks. So that's all stuff that you're paying for. Now, we don't really need this really super high-end stuff that goes down to ounces when we're talking about tactical rifle shooting. What I recommend if you want a budget trigger that's not going to break the bank but works very well is the Timney 510 trigger. I've used it quite a bit, still have one on one of our first Remington 700s sitting around here, and it works very well. It has a wide adjustable range. This one is set at 3.5 pounds and is a good reliable 3.5 pounds. It's a really clean break. It feels really good. So that is a great option. Now, as far as my opinion of the Remington X-Mark triggers, they're really a hit or miss trigger. They fixed some problems with the Walker, the pre-2006 trigger. They fixed some problems with the safety design on that trigger, but the lawyers appear to get involved on it, and the pull weights are generally overly heavy when they come out of the box. When you try to reduce that pull weight to something that is really more applicable to a match rifle, the pull weight doesn't want to stay consistent. It can drift a little bit from one side to the other. And this can be a little distracting. Also, it brings some reliability issues into my mind. If I have a trigger that's not remaining a consistent weight, that's drifting, I start to wonder about the reliability of that system. So if you have an X-Mark trigger and you can adjust it and the pull weight stays where it needs to be, then they can be a very good trigger. We have one of the X-Marks here that adjusted down to 3.5 pounds, and it's a dead consistent 3.5, and it has a very clean, very nice trigger pull on it. So that trigger, there's no reason to replace it. It can stay in the rifle. It's functioning great. The trigger right here on the AACSD, we tried to adjust that one down, and it just really has not remained consistent. So that one's going to get junked, and we're going to replace it with another trigger. The trigger I have here is a pre-2006 Walker type trigger, and this trigger is a great trigger for match rifles. The thing is, there are some issues with this trigger that have been brought up in previous years. The main one being the fire off safe condition. And what that is in this trigger, the safety blocks the sear from going down. So when you have the bolt closed and you have it cocked and the sear is sitting on the trigger, keeping that firing pin from going forward. When the rifle is placed on fire, the trigger is supporting the sear. When you press the trigger, it moves out of the way and the sear drops. Well, in this rifle, with this trigger system, when the rifle is cocked and you place the safety on in the safety condition, then the safety supports the sear, and the safety prevents the sear from going. The trigger can still be manipulated. You can still pull the trigger and it moves the trigger out of position so that the trigger would no longer support the sear. Well, what happens when these triggers get really gummed up and they're poorly maintained is while the rifle is on safe, you can pull the trigger and the trigger can stick in the fired position. Now, the only thing that's preventing the rifle from firing is the safety. Then when you place the safety in the fire position, it allows that sear to drop and release the firing pin, which causes the rifle to fire. So that's when you hear the fire off safe condition. It's just simply the shooter will place the rifle on fire and the rifle will indeed fire. This is a maintenance issue. It's somewhat of a design issue, but if the trigger is well maintained, you don't have a problem. The problem with all the lawsuits and all the bad press that they got is because people don't use proper firearm safety practices when they're handling their firearms. The old Remingtons 700s, when they first came out, there was a bolt blocking mechanism on the safety. When the safety was engaged, you could not operate the bolt. So if the rifle was loaded and the safety was engaged, you had to first take the rifle off safe in order to open the bolt and clear the cartridge from the chamber. What a lot of the cases of injuries from these rifles came from is people were not pointing the rifle in a safe direction when they took the rifle off safe to unload it. The rifle would fire when they took it off safe. The bullet would pass through walls, pass through doors, pass through horse trailers, and injure or kill someone on the other side. Don't point a weapon at anything you do not intend to shoot and treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Those two safety rules alone would have prevented 99.9% of any injuries caused by the Remington 700. So, the Walker trigger does have limitations. It still is a very good trigger to use on a match rifle. Just keep in mind what you're doing with it. Keep in mind the safety rules. If you don't want to take the chance, get a Timney 510 trigger. The Timney 510 uses the newer safety system where the safety blocks the trigger still supports the sear. When you take the weapon off safe, the trigger is still supporting the sear. The trigger has to be pulled before the rifle can be fired. So there are some good options for you. The more expensive triggers like the Jewel, they're great for bench rest triggers. The features are not really needed on a tactical target rifle, and they have the ability to get gummed up really easy and cause some reliability issues. So keep those in mind. Josh asks, what iPad Databook program would you recommend? Well, Josh, to my knowledge, there's only one Databook program out there right now that works on the iPad, and that is iDatabook, and it is actually designed for the iPhone. It doesn't have an appropriate scaling for the iPad, so when you use it on the iPad, you have to use the little 2x button to blow it up, and it really doesn't look real nice on the iPad, but it will still work on the iPad. I've used it a little bit. Really what drew me away from it is it's kind of cumbersome to get the data entered into the system. The free-form text entries just aren't as easy as with a regular paper data book like the Impact or Storm data books. So it's something that really you need to play with it and you need to decide if it works well for you. It's only a couple of bucks on the App Store, so you can go in, pick it up, and figure out if it will make your trips to the range easier, or if it's something that's going to fall by the wayside. I need to get back into it. I need to use it again for a little bit and see if we'll do a full review on it. I don't know yet, but keep an eye out for it. We may have that coming up in a few weeks. Robert asks, do you ever see new shooters with out-of-the-box cheap rifle scopes, combos, or novelty tactical stuff trying to achieve laser accuracy? How do you make someone understand the level of accuracy they want is not attainable from the system they just bought? I deal with this a lot. Well, Robert, first and foremost, try not to badmouth somebody's gear. It may not work well for them, it may not be the best thing out there, but it may be the best thing that they could afford. So we always try to keep that in mind. Really, if I'm out at the range though, and I just see somebody the next couple of benches over with something that really is cheap quality, I keep my mouth shut. I keep my nose in my own business. Now, if they are having problems and they are asking me questions, I'm more than happy to help out. But you don't want to be that guy at the range that always has an opinion about somebody else's stuff. They bought it. They're there to play with it. Usually, they're there just having fun. So as long as they're enjoying shooting their rifle, let them have at it. Now, if it's a professional shooter, a military or law enforcement shooter, and they're having some issues with some gear that really is not adept to the task, then I may step in, I may offer some suggestions, may tell them why their gear isn't working correctly and what they can do to fix it or what they need to upgrade to. And that's just because their lives on the line when you're looking at that gear. So if it's just a recreational shooter, you don't have to convince them that their gear is not able to do what they want it to do. If they're asking or they're having trouble or they're really stumbling over something, you may make some suggestions. But if they're really if they really believe because their uncle, brother's cousin, sister said that it'll do this, then let them go. Don't argue with them. I have before seen guys struggling with cheap scopes, cheap rifles, and I've taken the time to try to help them get the most out of that system. But in the end, if it won't shoot, it just won't shoot. If they won't believe that it won't shoot, then let them waste whatever ammo they want to waste. Or a lot of times, it just comes down to the shooter. I've seen systems where guys have been having all kinds of problems getting a rifle zeroed, and I can slide behind it, zero it just fine, and then they get back onto it and it's all over the place again. And in that case, it's just going to be a shooter, and a lot of people won't believe that they're not the best shooter in the world. So that's something you got to keep in the back of your mind anyway. But you don't want to be that guy at the range that's always butting in, always offering an opinion to people that just really don't want your help. So I hope that answers your question on that. Jacob asks, your opinion on neck turning. I would like to take my brass prep to the next level. Also, concentricity gauges, what to look for, and primer pocket uniforming tools. Well, Jacob, as far as neck turning, I really have not seen neck turning to offer a great advantage in my rifles. I recently took about 50 pieces of the Winchester brass that I usually use, and I went ahead and turned the necks all to a uniform dimension. First of all, in neck turning, you don't want to really take a lot of meat out of the necks. You're just trying to turn them to a uniform dimension from case to case. So I turned all of them to a uniform dimension, loaded them up with as much attention as I could to charge weight, seating depth, all the other loading steps, and then shot them side by side with my just regular neck sized ammo, and I really couldn't tell a difference. And if there was any difference at all, it didn't warrant the amount of time that it took me to prep those cases with neck turning. Now, if you just got time to waste, if you have nothing better to do, then sure, neck turning is going to be fine. It's not going to hurt anything, and you may get a very, very incremental increase in accuracy. But when we're talking about tactical rifles and we're looking at, half-minute angle is perfectly fine for anything that we're doing, then neck turning doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're a bench rest shooter, FTR shooter, something like that, then neck turning may be worthwhile for you. But for me, I would rather be able to load more ammunition in a quicker manner and be able to get out to the range and practice to improve my accuracy than turn necks to get, the highest accuracy I can out of them. Now, when I neck size, I use a Lee collet die, which it's not sensitive to the thickness of the necks. So I don't have to worry about measuring and keeping a consistent neck thickness to get consistent neck tension from case to case. The Lee die uses a collet to form the necks around a mandrel, so they give me a consistent inside diameter and they've given me a consistent neck tension no matter if I'm loading Winchester, LC, Federal, etc. So that's one of the reasons I like the collet neck sizing system that Lee uses. If you're using a bushing type system, then it's going to be sensitive to necks, to the wall thickness. Then it may be a better option to turn necks. And I don't know, later on if I switch to a bushing type die system, I may see more of a difference with neck turning than I would without. So that's my opinion on neck turning. If you guys have found a vast difference between neck turning or just regular neck sizing of your cases, please let me know. Finally, Jeffrey asks, I'm having trouble with the eye relief and shadowing with my Bushnell XRS 4.5 to 30. I've adjusted comb height and length of pull to what I believe is optimal. The sweet spot just seems so small I can never just get down on the rifle with no shadowing consistently. Tips to solve. Well, I would bet that the issue that you're having, if your scope is properly set up and your rifle is properly set up, the issue you're having is you're not getting a consistent cheek weld every time. If you're getting a consistent cheek weld, then your eyeball should be in the exact same spot behind the scope every time, and you shouldn't really notice a problem. What you get into with a lot of these scopes is when you get to the higher magnification, that eye box gets really, really small. It's really sensitive to your eye placement directly behind the scope. So you have to get that consistent cheek weld time and time again. If you're having problems with this and you've gone ahead and with your eyes closed, you've gotten everything adjusted comfortable on your rifle, you've opened them, noticed shadowing, you've adjusted the scope until the shadowing was gone, that's forward and back until the shadowing is gone, and then you drop down behind it again and you're having that problem, it's just because your face is not in the same spot. What you can do to help you with this is get dialed in, get to where you're perfect, where there's no shadowing, etc. And you need to mark that spot on your stock. Then go get an old button, something relatively small, a BB, an airsoft pellet, take some duct tape, and duct tape that on your stock to where that will just touch the corner of your mouth. And you need to be very precise with this when you're doing it, but you want it just at the corner of your mouth. Then what you can do, when you're getting on the rifle and you drop down, you can feel exactly where that button is at and you can position your face until it's right in the corner of your mouth. Now I say corner of your mouth because it's a very sensitive spot. Your lips are extremely sensitive, so you can feel very well when you get that right there. Now on my old M40A1, when I was still in the Marine Corps, we would tape moleskin to the foam to build up the cheek. And on mine, I would always end up getting a wrinkle in the tape that was right about at that spot. So I could drop down behind the rifle and that wrinkle in the tape would end up right in the corner of my mouth, and I knew I was dialed in just perfect. And I find this can help you getting into that repeat position time and time again. Now after you've done this for a couple of years, dropping down on the same rifle in the same setup, in the same position, you can remove that and you'll notice that you're dropping down into the same position every time without any external aids. But a button or some kind of device to locate your face on the stock every time can help you greatly. That's about it for this week's show. We've got a lot of things going on in the works here. We've got a lot of things that we were working on out at the range and a bunch of things that we're trying to wrap up. We were trying to get another episode of our AK-47 build out this week, but it just didn't happen. We ran into time constraints. That is almost done, so I hope to have it out in the next day or two. And this is basically the wrap up to the modifications we're doing, where we install a rifle dynamics adapter and an adjustable buttstock on it. After that, we're going to take it out to the range and we're going to do some more range shooting and come back and tell you how the whole system works as is. Got a couple of AR products that we're working on, and as always, we got a bunch of optics on deck that we're trying to get dialed in. Hopefully we'll get this mess cleaned up in the next couple of days and get it out to the range. Expect it'll probably be a couple of weeks before you see a range report on the 260 barrel. We are trying to wrap up the review on the Bushnell XRS 4.5 to 30 power and the Spur scope mount that is on it. This system has been working very, very well for us. I really am a fan of this scope. The only thing on it that I wish, or the only thing that's not on it that I wish it had, would be an illuminated reticle. But when we get into the review, I'll explain to you why that is not on there. Overall, it's been a great scope so far, and I'm really looking forward to doing the wrap up on it and letting you guys know how it's worked. That's all we've got. Please, if you've liked the episode, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. And until next week, get out and shoot!